So, well, I've just done the first slide, which is good. Appreciate that, David. You saved me some time. So the first thing I want to tell you about, well, I suppose I'd better tell you a little bit about me. The first thing is I've been told 2 or 3 times today already is that I'm bigger than my profile picture. I'm also a big target for David's gun, so I better keep to time. But the one thing I should say is that for 30 years or so, I've been in the games development industry. That's what I've done for my job. It's a very creative world. I started as a programmer, and in 2003 I set up my own company, games development company, and that company grew to 90 staff. It was quite a reasonably sized developer. But also in 2003, it was a big year for me because I started having some symptoms which changed my life, which were, it was called Meniere's disease, which made me become increasingly deaf, but also tinnitus and some dizzy spells, things like that. But this isn't a tale of woe. I do want to say that, I'm optimistic. In 2010, I actually stopped working full-time, and that's when I started doing landscape photography. Of course, the first 2 or 3 years, some would say the first 6 years, I've taken many very, very bad photographs, but the odd one in the first few years stuck out, and this is one that slipped the net of a kind of modicum pictures. But I didn't find that taking single images was very fulfilling for me as creatively. So what I did then was I spent 12 months photographing around Thirlmere in the Lake District, Thirlmere Reservoir. I found it gave me a little bit more time to spend at places, get to know the different areas. These, for example, were taken in the floods. I think it was early 2013 when the water level was phenomenally high. And I just found that the more I went back to Thirlmere, the more I wanted to know about the history of it and how it was created. That kind of thing. I found myself, as I went around, I was seeing snippets of what happened in the past, and I wanted to find more. So I went to the Armit Museum, which is in Ambleside, and there you can see lots of things from the time, photography from before the dam was created. There's descriptions of how people opposed the creation of Thirlmere as a reservoir, and not just in protests and such like, but there was poetry, things like that about Thirlmere. One of the most popular ones of those was called New Paradise Lost, and it was an 18-page poem. And this quote stood out to me. Say, shall we lose so great and dear delight and live without an Eden in our land? Now, I personally found Thirlmere a phenomenally beautiful place. I really enjoyed my time there. But when I looked through the records of the photography, this is actually a photograph from the same place as the previous one. It's called the Tottling Stone. It kind of teeters over the edge, but nowadays it's shaded by the trees. But you have to say, when you look at this from the 1800s, that it really was a paradise lost, a phenomenally beautiful place. So after I'd done that at Thirlmere, I moved to another place which was affected by industrial intervention, and that was the area around Hodge Close, Home Fell, and Moss Rig. I know many people know those areas now, and this is a tarn above Hodge Close Quarry. One of the things I like about this area, it's actually, although I call it Home Fell Tarn, it's actually a reservoir that was created to power the funicular lift that lifted the slate out of the quarry. And it's transformed itself since it's been disused into a really beautiful place. But I like to look at the things that tell the story in landscapes, things like just this broken twig. I've been past it many times before. It's something that happened in between times, and you kind of notice these things and want to make a record and use it in the photography. Anybody who follows me, on social media and the like, will know I've taken many, many pictures of this tree, and not just to compare here the difference in seasons, but you notice things like the bark on the tree over winter was eaten by the red deer, And then 18 months later, it's when this one was taken. The kind of green clothes of summer kind of disguised it as it's moved on. And just like as an author would use different types of language, different constructs to help tell a story, we can do the same in photography. I mean, this is just a simple flipped image that we've seen today, but I felt it told the story of the kind of frozen lake and the reflection much better than a straightforward photograph would do. And that's similar to this one, Tree of Pearls. We're overlooking the quarry, and it looked fantastic, the dewdrops on the trees, but a straightforward photograph f11, you couldn't really see anything at all. So this just uses a shallow, depth of field to kind of portray what I could see. And it's not just what's the story in terms of the whole project. I also like to look at that when choosing how to compose an image. You know, the story here, I find it phenomenal that these beautiful trees can grow right on the cliff edge, out of seemingly nothing. I really don't understand how it can work, but it does. This is a place called Home Ground, which is just a couple of 100 yards from the quarry and on Home Fell. And again, this place is strewn with slate that's been discarded. But now as kind of the birch trees, the rowan trees, transformed it completely. They look absolutely amazing, given what surrounds it. But then when you step back from Home Ground, this is Home Ground in the foreground, and look at its context in the wider aspects of the Lake District, with Hell Valley and Fairfield Fells beyond. So the last couple of images are from a place closer to where I live, near Thirlmere Forest. It's a place called Dead Lake, and as it might suggest, it's a really kind of stagnant pool. It's actually quite big, but of water. It's got no inflows or outflows, so it's really dark. And what I like about it, it was created in the 1930s, so you've got here an image with trees that I can only assume date back to the 1930s on the right here. They're covered in web, and what I really liked was how the flow of the trees on the shoreline kind of acted like a breaking wave, as if it was about to knock it over. And then I also like to look at, see what's the defining features of areas, and this particular area, it's only kind of 150 meters that I've photographed there, but I always feel like I'm being watched, and this is why I call Dead Lake Eye. So I like to use those overhanging branches. You know, how can I use those in compositions that make things different? And these are just a couple of kind of visual puzzles that I've taken. The first one on the left there is actually taken during the solar eclipse. So it's quite a unique image in that way. It's just a reflection in the lake. Similarly, the one on the right, I call that Dead Lake Life. And most of the year, this fern is kind of old and decrepit, but in early spring, it just looks so vibrant. So just to conclude, back at Home Fell now, and all three projects that I've shown are places where there's been massive intervention in the landscape, and I've focused on how they recovered. I've got to call this the green gown of summer, because the actual quarries at Moss Rig and Home Fell, they're all in this photograph. You just can't see them very well. So I've talked about what's the story and how I use those, but also what's the story for me. And I found that landscape photography, it's fulfilled a creative hole when I stopped doing video games full time, and also it's helped me get over, progressive illness. It's kind of been my green gown of summer. Did I manage to get away without being shot?
You did. Yeah.